We all know Team Sonic. Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles. Sometimes, Amy is often included as the fourth member of the group. Her inclusion is about as natural as it gets. But what if there was a fifth member? There have actually been several instances throughout the Sonic series where not only has there been a fifth member added to Sonic's group, but depending on the era and media, it's been different every time. The most notable as of today are Styx the Badger, Trip the Sungazer, Rouge the Bat, and Cream the Rabbit. And today we will be focusing on Cream. So, who is Cream the Rabbit anyway? Why did she deserve the coveted fifth spot in Sonic's group once upon a time? And why does she may or may not deserve that spot over the others? Let's dive in and find out. Before I get started, I want to take a moment to thank my channel members. This video shoutout goes to Doom. If you'd like to have your name featured here and have a possible shoutout, please consider becoming a member by hitting the join button. And I want to thank my patrons too. The support means a lot and it allows me to keep creating content. And even if you can't become a member, please make sure you subscribe and hit the bell. It all helps so much. And without further ado, let's get back to the video. Cream the Rabbit is a character that debuted in early 2003 for Sonic Advance 2, but her origin is a bit more peculiar. Much like E123 Omega, she was actually created for the 2004 game Sonic Heroes to fill the gap for the necessary character type. In this case, it was because Team Rose needed a flight type member. And Sonic Team liked her so much that they added her in basically everything they were working on at the time. And right about that time when Sonic Advance 2 was coming out, Sonic X was first airing in Japan at the same time. So not only was Cream featured prominently in the main cast for both Sonic Advance 2 and Sonic X, but she also got tons and tons of merchandise to coincide with the new Sonic X show, along with well-established characters like Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles. And next up, she also got a really small cameo in Sonic Adventure DX on the GameCube, where she can be seen flying around Station Square here and there. Cream's earliest game cameo can be traced all the way back to 2002's Sonic Mega Collection, featuring unlockable artwork of her along with her Chao Cheese. That is a whole year and some change before Sonic Heroes would even release, the game that conceptualized Cream in the first place. So, what is the deal with Cream anyway? Why did Sonic Team keep shoving her everywhere before Sonic Heroes? Personally, I think it's because it brings much needed balance to the portrayal of the Sonic cast during the adventure era. Sonic was a cool, confident leader. Tails, now believing in himself, helps Sonic out in his own unique ways rather than just being in his shadow. Knuckles is the strong, stubborn, and sometimes hot-headed and aloof guy. Amy brings love and empathy to the group, backed with strength powered by passion. However, now that Tails and Amy have much more agency and strength, especially compared to before, Cream essentially fills this role now, being the young child of the group. She's got manners, she respects the rules, and she looks up to Sonic and the rest of the group. She also has some pretty cool abilities too. She can use her huge ears to fly around, much like how Tails can use his tails to fly. Besides that last point, I'd argue she's the most grounded in reality of the group, and because of that, she can easily identify as a surrogate for young children to relate to. She is the only character in the series to have a parent that's present, after all. Additionally, I'd say she's the Tails to Amy Sonic, which brings a much more complex dynamic to the group of five. Amy having a little sister figure is pretty cool, and it tells the kids that the series isn't just about all the boys, but more so everyone. After Sonic Heroes, Cream would also go on to play a large role in Sonic Battle and Sonic Advance 3, which are two 2004 games for the Game Boy Advance. After that, she was a support character for Blaze in the 2005 Nintendo DS game, Sonic Rush. And, ever since then, she's been largely absent, or shown as a background character. Or just gone completely. In the most ambitious Sonic game in the mid-2000s, Sonic 06, Cream was nowhere to be found. However, she was one of the many characters to be rescued in 2011's Sonic Generations. However, I cannot ignore the fact that she was a playable character in the multiplayer for Sonic Riders, and only one of the Sonic and Mario games, which is the Rio 2016 Olympics. Not the console version, mind you, but the portable version on the 3DS only. Sure, every character besides Sonic took a huge backseat ever since Sonic 06. But Cream is one of the few who really got hit the hardest with her many absences. What I mean is, even though every Sonic character got benched after Sonic 06, some other characters showed up more often than Cream in spin-offs, and sometimes they had some kind of narrative relevance. But not Cream. It's especially weird that it happened right after the brand went out of its way to portray her as the fifth Beatle of Sonic's group, just for a few short years, and then she just disappeared. She was essentially there alongside Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and Amy as Sonic's group during the early and mid-2000s. She was created for 2004's Sonic Heroes, and by 2006, she was just completely sidelined. So, what happened? I think Cream was a victim of circumstance. At this time, the Sonic series was essentially adding, at least on average, one new playable character per game. And while this enriches and populates Sonic's world, when it comes to translating that into a video game, sometimes not everything will make the jump. Sonic eventually started to have so many characters, and not every single one of them could share the spotlight or do their fair share of lifting for whatever the narrative Sonic team wanted to tell. So some were set aside, like Cream, and then they had to wait their turn. And ever since the introduction of Blaze and Sonic Rush, Cream's relevance began to quickly fade from the main entries, especially after the aforementioned Sonic 06. We all know the story and the consequences of Sonic 06 and how it led to Sega scaling back the cast. From that point on, it was just Sonic as the only playable character. Tails lost his playable character status, but he was still kept around as Sonic's sidekick. And everyone else was just kind of gone. Sometimes, even if the characters were added to the story, it was just the failsafe Knuckles and/or Amy, and even then there wasn't much for them to do in the story. Eventually, they would bring back more characters to be present in the story, but they were just usually cheerleaders, or they sat around and waited for Sonic to do something. Hell, in the two games that did do this, Generations and Forces respectively, Cream was only present in Generations. She didn't even get to show up to be part of the Resistance, and it's not like it's because she's a kid either, because Tails and Charmy were there. So we know that her revoked relevance wasn't entirely personal, but given the fact that she had main character status for a few years, where did Cream shine the most? I would say the Sonic games on the Game Boy Advance, Sonic X, and Sonic Heroes. After that, she was just kind of soft retired. But what made her so appealing in these entries? Let's start with her debut, Sonic Advance 2. She teams up with Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles to defeat Eggman and rescue her mother, Vanilla. Next up is Sonic Battle, where she and the other characters bonded with the Gazoid Emerald, and her good-hearted nature was a positive influence on him. In Sonic Advance 3, she teamed up with Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and Amy again, and then fought Eggman, who took Emerald's data and likeness, and then built a new enemy out of it, Gemerald. Eventually, Eggman is defeated, and Cream and Vanilla salvage Gemerald's body, and then they have Tails make some adjustments so that he's a bit more friendly. And then from there on out, Gemerald even begins to live with Cream and Vanilla. And then in Sonic Heroes, Cream's Chow Cheese has a twin named Chocola that went missing, so Cream teams up with Big and Amy, forming Team Rose to find him. In Sonic Rush, she teamed up with Blaze to help her find the Soul Emeralds, and then after that, it was kind of it for her. Although, as I said, she did appear in Sonic Generations as one of the many friends who attended Sonic's birthday party and then needed to be rescued from white space after the Time Eater incident. This role was not unique to her though, as lots of Sonic's friends who hadn't had recent appearances were there. And then, completely out of nowhere, most recently, she was a playable character in Sonic Dream Team, a mobile game exclusive to Apple Arcade. This is mostly because there needed to be a partner for Tails that had similar abilities, such as how Sonic and Amy are similar and Knuckles and Rouge are similar. Cream just happened to fit the bill. Hopefully this tells Sega that these characters are interesting and fan favorites and deserve to be playable. All they have to do is just base them off of Sonic as the foundation and just give them slightly different abilities. Of course, I am not a game dev, but I don't really see what's stopping them at the end of the day. In Sonic X, even though she's a main character, she's often there for support, not really getting many chances to demonstrate her abilities in battle, as opposed to characters like Sonic, Knuckles, or even Amy. Once again, this isn't just an issue unique to Cream. For example, Tails. Tails takes on a support role just like Cream, but this time he's the tech guy. So, what did Cream contribute then? While she may not have the strength or brain power of her other friends, where she shines is her sweet-natured personality. Sonic has the speed, Tails has the brains, Knuckles has the strength, Amy has the persistence, and Cream has the heart. Her down-to-earth and kind-hearted nature brings much-needed balance to the team and humanizes the main five. Speaking of the main five, if you've noticed by now, I keep mentioning the number 5. Have you heard of the 5-man band concept? It's an incredibly popular trope in fiction, and you see it all the time. Kids Next Door, Power Rangers, Teen Titans, and Sailor Moon are all popular examples. But why 5? According to TV tropes, there really isn't a particular reason as to why it works or why it's so popular, but it could simply be because 5 is the perfect number for the amount of different archetypes to bounce off each other without feeling too bloated. It allows for the right amount of chemistry. And, as I've said, Sonic isn't a stranger to this at all. Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and Amy are often staples of the group, with the 5th character often being different depending on the era and media. Sonic is the leader, Tails is the brains, Knuckles is the strong guy and friendly rival, Amy is the potential love interest for the leader and voice of reason, and Cream is the heart and soul, along with being the little kid of the group that looks up to the others. If you sit back and analyze it, there's plenty going on here amongst these 5, and it feels like a tight-knit dynamic. So now that we're familiar with the 5-man band trope, it's pretty easy to see that it's used in other Sonic media as well. Like I said, in Sonic Boom, the 5th member is Styx. In Sonic Prime, it's Rouge. And in Sonic Superstars, it's Trip. There's often repeated patterns here that I've noticed. Usually the 5th member is female, and they're almost always orange. Well, except Rouge, because she wasn't originally created for this role. It seems like only the characters created with the 5-man band concept in mind are orange. Rouge kind of accidentally just inherited this spot and was reworked to fit in Sonic's group in Sonic Prime, likely because they wanted to utilize an existing character that was a bit more popular than Cream. So, why does Sega do this, and why is the 5th member a revolving slot? My biggest guess is that Sega and Sonic Team are consistently experimental, which in and of itself is not a bad thing. The cast of Sonic characters is so big as it is, and they aren't really churning out new characters left and right anymore. As of late, the kinds of stories they tried telling are much smaller in scale, with Trip feeling like an exception to the rule. But I think that's more or less because of the classic and modern dimensions having different characters and whatnot. So it is pretty easy to say that Sega is more comfortable making new characters for the classic side of things, especially since it's smaller in scale. But with modern Sonic, it feels a bit more restricted, especially since there's way more going on, and Sega approaches the design of the modern games with much more caution, usually opting to play it a bit more safe. The 2D games aren't afraid to use more playable characters since they all play like Sonic with some kind of added ability, but I get that it's a little different for the 3D games, but I think you could still use Sonic as a base and then build from there. That's why Trip being added to Sonic Superstars, a classic-styled game, was not seen with the same kind of flair as, let's say, Tails, Amy, or Knuckles as DLC in Sonic Frontiers, which was originally Sonic only. In fact, the Sonic Frontiers character DLC was treated similarly to Mighty and Ray's DLC for Sonic Mania. But that was only really a big deal because those characters were just completely absent from the series for decades. Tails, Knuckles, and Amy were not absent, they just weren't playable. But because their playable return was treated similarly to Mighty and Ray, it really speaks volumes about how if a character besides Sonic is playable in a modern title these days, it's a really, really big deal, and not just a, oh, that's kind of neat thing like with the classic titles. But why the difference? I think it comes down to the approach that they have towards the modern and classic branches of Sonic. Classic Sonic is smaller and much more simplistic in scale. The characters don't speak, so outside of character design and maybe an assigned archetype, there really isn't much to show off character-wise. Multiple playable characters in 2D Sonic are also easier for Sega to implement, whereas in 3D they need to get a little bit more creative. That is the main barrier to entry for most new 3D Sonic characters, at least playable ones. Modern Sonic also requires a bit more personality to the characters since they can talk, unlike the classic characters. They need the right voice, the right inflection, everything. There needs to be much more going on under the hood to make these characters work. That's why they've been coming up with new characters and NPC roles rather than playable roles, such as Infinite and REM for example. Again, Sega has demonstrated in the past that they were able and willing to come up with new and exciting characters. But eventually they just fell into the habit of creating a cool new character just to swap them out with another, and then another, and then another. And personally, I think it was the right call to put a stop to that. There's so much potential for the world of Sonic with all the cool characters they've created. But for now, they're mostly sticking to their comfort zone, occasionally stepping out of it. Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and Amy have legacy status, especially compared to Cream, so I think she's seen as the most disposable in the interchangeable 5th character role. It really is a shame too, since Cream was pushed as a main character, even getting tons of cool merch from the time. These plushies here are some of my all-time favorite Sonic plushes ever created, and they're from the Japanese Sonic X UFO plush set from 2003. And Cream was such a big deal at the time that she got a plush instead of Amy. It was really kind of baffling, but only now in hindsight does it show how confident they were in Cream being a mainstay. So ultimately, Cream suffers from being one of the many modern characters that Sega doesn't really know what to do with anymore. Especially since there's so many other fan-favorite characters that they can use that also need attention. But given recent games like Sonic Dream Team, even if it's technically a mobile title, it does give me hope that someday Sega will utilize Cream a bit more often. To me, the early 2000s era Sonic was incredibly special, and she was a huge part of its identity. Her Chow cheese being present also highlights just how big the Chow Garden really was, even if it was just in a handful of games. I don't know. It might just be because I was the right age at the right time or something. But personally, Cream will always be the best 5th member of the cast, and she shouldn't ever be forgotten. And hey, at least she got a brief shout out in the OKKO and Sonic crossover. And with that being said, what do you think of Cream the Rabbit? Do you think she deserves to show up in future games, even if she just shows up for the plot and isn't a playable character? If not, who do you think is the best character to fit the 5-man band for Sonic's group? Let me know down in the comments below, and I'll see you guys for the next video. Matane!